שלום, מתי נחיה בשקט פה.
Thank you for joining us today on Standing with Israel. I'm Rothstein, your host, and I'm the CEO of Stand With Us. Today we're going to talk about a brand new book by Jody Cohen. The book is entitled Tikkun Olam, Israel versus COVID-19. And COVID-19 is on everybody's minds, so I know you are going to be very, very excited to hear what she's discovered. Jody Cohen is an award-winning public affairs consultant with over 20 years of experience advising multinational companies on their political engagement and sustainability. Since 2013, she has focused on helping these companies report on how they are contributing to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Part of this work involves reporting for pharmaceutical, medtech, and healthcare companies, and it is through this work that the idea of Tikkun Olam, Israel versus COVID-19, was born. As a current affairs commentator, Jody can regularly be seen on Israel's I-24, in the UK's Jewish News, and in India's award-winning news channel, World is One News. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you so much, Roz. Pleasure to be here.
So let's start from the beginning. What motivated you to write this book? And by the way, write it so quickly. So thank you very, very much on behalf of all of us out here in the world for your doing this so quickly.
So I was in lockdown like everybody else, and every day in the news I was seeing stories of more and more innovations that were being developed in Israel. And I just thought it was incredible how quickly these innovations were, and never mind my writing the book, the fact that this research was coming out and these innovations were coming out, and that companies were taking their technologies that they had and their research that they were already working on and really pivoting them towards the coronavirus. So I was reading these stories in the news every day, and as you said, I have experience working with pharmaceutical and medtech and healthcare companies. And I was thinking that this is really like a historic time. Never before has the whole of humanity been faced with the same challenge across the whole world at the same time. That I have a friend in the United Kingdom, and she runs a nursing home. And I was talking to her about all these innovations that I'd heard of that I thought might help her residents in her home and to help protect her staff and things like that. And then the second thing was a conversation I was having with my 13-year-old son, who had his bar mitzvah at the height of the lockdown. And we were talking about the coronavirus, and he was saying that, when bad things happen in the world, unfortunately, anti-Semites blame Israel and the Jewish people. And when he said that, I couldn't argue with him. I thought, unfortunately, history shows that very much to be the case. And I thought this story is even more important. Yes, on a positive side, because everyone is interested in coronavirus and wants to know about the technologies that are in the pipeline and that, please God, some of them might prove to be effective. But also on the negative side, that we're seeing more and more anti-Semitism, unfortunately, on social media, and people really need to be educated about what the truth is and what's really going on in Israel. So that's why I wrote the book in 1 month, in the second month of lockdown in Israel.
So speaking of what Israel is doing, you learned a lot of great things and you wrote about them. Why don't you tell us about your favorites, some favorite things that Israel is doing, well, to contain the virus and to fight the virus?
Okay, it's really hard to say my favorite because there are so many incredible things. But to help to contain the virus, so looking at campaigns and innovations that are really helping to prevent the further spread of the virus. I'm actually going to start with talking about United Hatzalah. That's the first story that I actually mention in the whole book. And And it's well known that Eli Beer, their founder and CEO, unfortunately was battling his own fight, a serious, serious fight with coronavirus in a hospital in the United States. And with that going on in the background, with all that stress and worry of, of his situation, his team rallied around. They carried on their incredible work as first responder organization, and in the space of one weekend, they worked with the developer to come up with one of the world's first contact tracing apps called TrackVirus. Another one is the Sheba Medical Center. In the space of 92 hours, they opened an underground medical facility underneath the hospital, which is just unbelievable. I mean, they saw what was happening in China. They saw what was happening with the passengers on the Diamond Princess cruise ship. And they were ready when the first Israeli passengers came out of quarantine and were finally allowed back in Israel. They were ready. They had this whole underground facility separate for corona patients so that the main hospital could carry on functioning as usual and keeping the corona patients separate from the rest of the hospital. And Sheba is, it's unbelievable. They have something like 200 projects going on, looking into all aspects of coronavirus. So whether it's preventing the spread of the virus or testing or looking at different solutions for patient care and protecting their medical staff, as well as treatments, vaccines. The work they're doing is, the breadth and depth of the work that they're doing is phenomenal.
Could you talk a little bit more about how Israel contained the virus? Any more ways? Because people are always wanting to learn and not get it. What has Israel done to contain it? I heard they opened up hotels where people were, filling the hotel space and being fed and just staying in their individual rooms. That was an incredible story. I don't know who else has done anything like that.
I haven't heard of corona hotels anywhere else in the world either. I think it's actually, putting the health aspect aside, looking at the economy, there's no tourism. So to use these empty hotels and to keep the jobs open for staff makes absolute sense, especially when you've got neighborhoods with, smaller neighborhoods with lots of large families living in very close proximity together. So they have two types of corona hotels. They have the hotels that are for the patients, so the people who have the virus but aren't sick enough to need to be in hospital, or maybe they've been in hospital but they can be released to a corona hotel and just finish their recovery there in an environment where it's safe, they're not going to infect other family members, and they can get medical attention as and when they need. And then they have corona hotels also for people who need to be in lockdown but who don't have the space in their own apartments to be separate from their families, so they can go into those corona hotels as well and be in isolation. But I have a friend actually who was in a corona hotel, and thank God he's out now. He had the coronavirus, and he was saying that a lot of the patients were actually socializing amongst each other, and they had games rooms open for them and everything, so that they could, live as normal a life during their stay while they were there, and know that they were safe from infecting other people. Yeah, the work that's going on in terms of preventing the spread, it's innovative. One of my favorites is a company called Rothstein, and they're based in Haifa. And they've been going for a number of years. And what they do is they take cells from a placenta, and we all know about a placenta is what gives life to babies. So they take cells from the placenta, and they use it to help people who have serious conditions in a number of areas. And when the coronavirus appeared, they thought, well, let's look into if potentially the placenta cells might be able to help patients with corona. Now, obviously, the trial process to get a treatment approved is very, very long. But they have got permission to use these placenta cells, the placenta therapy, on patients who are at severe risk of dying from the corona. So what they did is they treated in Israel and the United States as part of a compassionate use program, it's called. So these are really patients where, unfortunately, there isn't any hope. The doctors are saying there's nothing else that they can do. So they're trying these placenta cell therapy on them. And they just announced a 28-day follow-up, which showed that after 28 days, 87% of those patients who were at severe risk of dying are still alive. So I think that shows real promise, and obviously with the huge caveat that this does need to go through all the processes and the approvals and the testing. We don't know which innovations and treatments are going to be effective. We don't know which ones won't be effective. Some of the innovations mentioned in the book, perhaps won't get the funding they need to develop. This is very early days, but the book is really a snapshot of, I would say, history. In the future, this will be a snapshot of history of what Israel has done over a 2-month period, what the scientists have been doing, and the doctors and the startup CEOs and also the non-profit CEOs, what they've all been doing to look at what they have and pivot it to see how they can help in the fight against the coronavirus.
Jody, you talked a little bit about vaccines. Can you address that? I know the whole world is waiting to hear good news about a vaccine developed. Will it come out of Israel? What do you think? And what do you want to tell us about vaccine development?
So much work is being done. There's something like 100 potential vaccines being developed around the world, and several within Israel. Just to mention a few really, really briefly, you've got the Israeli Institute of Biological Research that has just been testing an antibody vaccine on hamsters, and the hamsters that received the vaccine significantly fared better than those that didn't. So that's showing some promise. There's a company called MigVax, and the Miguel Galilee Research Institute has been researching coronavirus in poultry for a number of years, and they realized that the poultry coronavirus is very similar to the human coronavirus. So they're looking at developing a potential oral vaccine. And then you've got individuals like Professor Gershoni at Tel Aviv University, who has also done much work over a number of years on the coronavirus and has identified what he calls the Achilles heel that stops the virus being able to attach to cells and duplicate. So lots of potential work coming out. Obviously, we don't know how long it's going to take. If a vaccine is developed in 5 years, that's considered quick. They're speeding things up all over the world to try and get through the regulatory authorities and the processes. If it happens in a year or two, that will set records. But I would just say it's not a winner takes all. It doesn't really matter where the vaccines are actually developed. We're going to need several vaccines. Some will work with some people, others will work with others, and the world is going to need them. So we're going to need a lot of vaccines.
So Jody, so much is going on in Israel, and I'm sure everybody wants to read your book and find out the details of what's going on and what has been done during this COVID-19 fight. Why do you think the Israelis are always so motivated and so busy finding answers and so ahead of the game in so many ways? Why do you think that's the case?
I think that's a really excellent question. Israeli society faces a lot of challenges, whether it's water shortages or trying to use solar energy, renewable energy, or the number of wars that unfortunately Israel has had to face since its re-establishment in 1948. It's faced numerous existential threats. And I think really society here has seized the coronavirus as another existential threat. And it's addressing it like it's addressed those threats in the past. So, with the water example, for example, we're at a disadvantage. There's not a lot of water sources in the country. And yet we've turned that to our advantage, and we've now become a water exporter, and we're global leaders in water recycling. And it's the same with the coronavirus. People really have taken it as their personal mission. And in my discussions with the people behind the research and innovations being developed here, they really see it as their personal mission Israelis are used to working fast, they're used to working in an agile way and responding to crises. So they just see it as another one of the crises in Israel's history, and we're going to deal with this and we will win in the end. And I think that's really important, whether the numbers are going up or the numbers of cases are going down. This book really shows that there's cause for optimism with so much being developed in Israel. The one thing I would just say about this book is this isn't a book for people who are looking for medical advice. This, for that you need to go and see your doctor. This is really a snapshot looking at over 30 innovations that have been developed within a 2-month period in Israel as really an illustration of the incredible work that's being done here. And I think that this is a really important story that the world needs to hear.
So the world is watching and waiting for updates. Is there a place online that they can see updates of the technology coming out of Israel related to the stories in your book?
Absolutely. So people can buy the book and they can see updates on the innovations featured in the book as well as others at tikkunolamIsrael.com. And the book is also available on Amazon and at other online and retail bookstores all around the world.
Jody, thank you so much for being with us and for writing this important work at this important time. Thank you so much.
And I just want to thank you, Roz, as well, because you very, very kindly wrote an endorsement for this book, which I'm really, really grateful for. And I'd also like to state the work that Stand With Us does is absolutely incredible. I'm a huge fan of Stand With Us. Your work in fighting anti-Semitism and in educating about Israel is so important, and 10% of the proceeds of this book I'm actually donating to Stand With Us, because I think the work that you do is absolutely invaluable. So thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you so much for that, Jody. We count on friends like you to be our good partners for the work that we do around the world. So thank you. So everybody, thank you for joining us today at Standing with Israel, and we will see you next time.
מתי יבוא שלום